On the south wall of the apse in the Church of San Vitale, actually across from Emperor Justinian and his attendants, we see Empress Theodora and her attendants, also a mosaic. Theodora, of course, we immediately know which one's Theodora. One, remember, she's empress, so we can recognize her by her royal purple robes. Also, she wears a crown. And just like Justinian, she has this halo that surrounds her head, which represents her divine right to rule. So she's been divinely appointed a ruler, just like Justinian. She is also a little bit taller than everybody else in the composition, a little bit scale-wise bigger. So we're seeing another example of the hieratic scale. I'd say it's a little bit more subtle here with Justinian's, but still he does seem to be the biggest person or a little bit taller person in the composition. Now Empress Theodora stands behind a fluted, or stands in front of or beneath a fluted shell canopy. And she also carries a huge golden chalice, which is a cup, and it's studded with jewels, so it's very richly decorated. Now the chalice, of course, is important because it is a big part of communion. So it's a very sacred religious ceremony in Catholic religion. So in the last video we mentioned iconography, and iconography is the study of the significance and interpretation of the subject matter of the art. So when we look at this image, we actually can see several symbols that can give us a little bit more information about what's going on. So say we don't have any context for this image and we don't know that it is a Christian image. Well, there's several things that we can look at that maybe will help us interpret it as a Christian image. The shell that she stands beneath is a representation of rebirth and resurrection. Of course, that's a big theme in the Passion of Christ. This curtain over here represents the curtain of heaven. So he's like, this guy is revealing heaven beneath there. It also refers to some Old Testament things as well. We have this fountain that represents eternal life. We also have a representation of this kind of sort of Corinthian looking column, and that refers to the Roman past as well. So we have not only Christian themes, but also some other themes as well. And we have this dove that represents the Holy Spirit. Now the chalice is an offering to Christ, and this theme of offering is further emphasized by the three magi that are depicted on Theodora's robe. Now, if you recall the story of the three magi or three kings, they came and brought the Christ child gifts at his birth. The eyes are also very large in Byzantine art, particularly in this image, and we can see that in Justinian's image as well. And the eyes are, in Byzantine philosophy, represent a mirror to the soul. So they have nothing to hide. They are good, pure souls and dedicated to Christ. I think in this image you can see a little bit more of that mosaic and the contrast of colors. They do a really good job kind of mixing in different colors to create different patterns here in this angle or in this image. Now these two images of Theodora and Justinian are examples of royal Christian propaganda. It's this imperial Christianity. So here are these two peoples, and it's not really any different than what we saw in Rome or what we saw in other cultures, where people who are royalty or are rulers, they're going to associate themselves with the religion to, of course, get more power. And that's what they're doing here. They are representing themselves performing this very sacred ritual of communion, participating in communion, and so that way they are associating themselves with Christ and Christianity, and that of course gives them higher status and more power. Now the representation of Theodora is especially interesting because remember, she has this kind of scandalous background. She's from a lower class. Now of course at this point she's married to Justinian, so I guess her class has been raised, but it's still kind of this scandalous background. But here she is depicted on this large scale in this important cathedral with her husband Justinian across the way from her. So it's really kind of elevating her status, like just insanely elevating her status. And it really, I think, says a lot about their relationship and how they ruled together. When we were talking about the Hagia Sophia, we said that the focus of the church, the first focus, was the screen with the altar behind it. So we know that there were screens on which icons were depicted on, and this separated the altar from the rest of the church. Now these icons, the term icon means, icon is an image representing a sacred figure or event in the Byzantine church. Icons were venerated by the faithful who believed them to have miraculous powers to transmit messages to God. In the Eastern Christian church, these Eastern Christians prayed to Christ, Mary, and the saints while looking at images of these characters on icons. The first icon was thought to have been a portrait of Christ sent to the king of Edessa by Christ himself. To the Eastern Church, icons did not contradict the Christian command not to worship idols, so they don't view it as idolatry. They thought that it was fine to venerate an idea or holy person depicted in art. You were not allowed to worship icons, but you could use them as aids to meditation and prayer. Icons were thought to serve as intermediaries between the worshipers and the holy characters which they depicted. Now, most early icons were destroyed in the 8th century. The destruction of icons during this period was known as iconoclasm. Iconoclasm was launched by Emperor Leo III in 726, and he decrees that all religious images were idols and should be destroyed. The city of Constantinople had actually been invaded right before this, and the city almost fell. And Emperor Leo III thought that the reason that the city almost fell and they were almost defeated is because the people were living in sin, and that God was punishing them for their practice of idolatry. Other theories say that there was actually a volcano nearby. And again, he thought that this was God's wrath, warning them against idolatry. So whatever the case, he decided that the way people were treating these icons were examples of idolatry, so he had them destroyed, and people were no longer allowed to use these icons. Now, the policy was reversed in 843 by Empress Theodora, a different Empress Theodora. The Armenian is what they call her. And unfortunately, very few icons survive from this period because of this iconoclasm destruction. One of the icons that survives from before iconoclasm is the Virgin and Child with Saints and Angels, and it's from about 550 to 600 CE, and it is depicted on wood panel. It's from Mount Sinai in Egypt, from the monastery of St. Catherine. So it's wood panel, and then they use encaustic painting. And encaustic painting, we've talked about it before, just to refresh your memory. This is hot wax painting, and it involves, like, you basically heat beeswax, and then you add colored pigment to this wax, and then you apply this hot liquid kind of paste, waxy paste to a surface, usually prepared wood. Sometimes you can do a canvas, but usually it's wood. So what we see in this image is the Virgin Mary, who is Christ's mother, and of course she is in the center of the composition with a halo. Here she is viewed as the powerful but ever-forgiving intercessor, this go-between. She would appeal to her divine Son on behalf of worshipers. She sits, like we saw in the Hagia Sophia, she sits on the throne of Solomon. Although here you can see it actually looks a little bit more naturalistic, although still I'm not sure what's going on with her feet as far as that's concerned. King Solomon is a great Jewish king of the past, and so this is thought to be his throne. She holds the Christ child in his lap, this is, or in her lap. This is actually a very typical depiction of the Virgin Mary. We'll see this time and time again as the Virgin Mary with Christ child in her lap. Very common. This type of image is referred to as a virgin and child image. Now, actually, so here's the Christ child here. I think this is one of the better Christ children from these periods. This one actually does look more like a baby than some of the other ones that we will see. And then if you take the second half of this class, you'll see that as well. On either side of Mary and Christ, you see the warrior saints, Saint Theodore on the left and Saint George on the right, who were both legendary figures said to have slain dragons. And of course, dragons represent paganism. So this serves as a metaphor to represent the triumph of the church over the evil serpent of paganism and the devil. So the devil is often represented like as a dragon or as a serpent or something like that. Now, unlike many Byzantine images, this one departs a little bit. I think these figures look a little bit more naturalistic. The male figures, maybe, especially these guys, are somewhat stylized. But the Virgin herself, I mean, I love how she's like wearing, it looks like she's wearing blush. It's just like, it's just kind of cute. But we have the Virgin and Child in the center looking a little bit more naturalistic than what we're used to. But then we look at these guys and like, they just look totally flat. Like his jaw seems to not recede into space at all. He just kind of looks like he's squashed up against a glass panel. But she has a little bit of modeling in her chin, and so does Christ child a little bit too. So it does seem to depart from the kind of standard Byzantine image in that way. Maybe it was influenced by Roman painting. That's one of the things that scholars speculate. They also love the way that these guys' necks are depicted, especially this one where you see that shadow, to help create some modeling as well. Now we still have those floating feet that we saw in St. Fatale, but we do kind of get at least a little bit of an impression that there are, the figures actually do have bodies beneath this drapery. Like you can kind of see like a little bit of a knee here, and then of course you can sort of see her body a little bit here as well. So that does also depart from San Vitale. By the mid-9th century, the iconoclasm movement lost power. New leadership took over and revitalized the Byzantine Empire. The empire shifted from centering in the lands along the realm of the Mediterranean Sea that had been the Roman Empire to now focusing on present-day Turkey and the areas by the Black Sea, the Balkan Peninsula, Greece, and southern Italy. The influence of Byzantine culture extended into Russia, Ukraine, and Venice. Now, art was revitalized during this period. Iconoclasm had really severely limited art, so you can't really produce these icons anymore, and really any figure art, so that's kind of a problem. And art and architecture during this time, during the Middle Byzantine period, starts to prosper since iconoclasm has been lifted. So the Middle Byzantine period is visually powerful and stylistically coherent and reflects the strong spiritual influence of the period's autocratic and wealthy leadership. Because of the region in which it was located, very few Middle Byzantine churches have survived in Constantinople today. But there are some churches that have survived beyond the imperial capital. In Venice, which is a northeastern Italian city, Venice was actually subject to Byzantine rule in the 6th and 7th centuries. At the end of the 10th century, the Byzantine Empire granted Venice a special trade status that allowed its merchants to control much of the commercial interchange between the East and the West. This brought Venice great wealth and increased its exposure to Eastern cultures, and we see that reflected in its art and architecture. This is the Cathedral of San Marco, and it's in Venice, and it was first began in 1063 CE, and it's one of Venice's great Byzantine monuments.